Okay, here we are. Buddhism, GCE, Edexcel, Life of the Buddha, paper 4, and we're looking at the acts of the Buddha. This is number 4, acts of the Buddha, number 4, his youth, a life of pleasure and indulgence. As a child, the Buddha was named Siddhartha, we learnt last one, which means fulfillment of wishes. Uh, King wanted a son, he got a son. One of the first visitors to the palace was the sage called Asita, who was reputed for his wisdom, his powers of clairvoyance. Asita predicted that the child would be out of the ordinary and could become either a great king or a great spiritual leader. But King Suddhodana hoped his son would be the heir to the throne, so he deliberately shielded the child from anything that might trigger spiritual longings. Dominic Side notes that all possible luxuries and comforts were provided for him to ensure that he was satisfied with his life in the palace. In fact, not just one palace, 3 palaces were built for him, one for each season of the year, in the hot season and the cool season and the rainy season. He was surrounded with beautiful parks, gardens, music, and attractive attendants. He married the beautiful Yasodhara, with much ceremony and rejoicing, and gave birth to a baby named Rahula, which means fetter or chains. The king thought that everything would turn out as he had wished. Hmm, was it so? Uh, Denise Cush, she says there are only 2 references in the Pali Canon. She's more circumspect, Denise Cush, in times. And we're told that he was brought up in luxury and refinement, that his future destiny was foretold at his birth by an old Brahmin sage called Asita, and this was at the naming ceremony on the 5th day by 8 Brahmins. The legend refers to a prophecy that the boy would grow up to be one of 2 things: a universal emperor or a Buddha, an enlightened teacher, depending on whether he ever stopped to think about suffering. As a result, his father tried to keep all knowledge of suffering from him. He's married at 16, according to legends, to a neighbouring princess whose name usually is given as Yasodhara, although we're not sure about that. Following the customs of the time, he won her heart in the contest of warrior skills, archery, fencing, and riding. In some versions, he had a harem of dancing girls. In fact, it seems that he began to fulfill the prophecy made by Asita long before he left the palace. Uh, on, at the time of his birth, his son, he names his own son Rahula, uh, which now that means chains. Now it seems he already is restless. He's It feels like he's in chains. He's in a palace, a prison of paradise, as one commentator puts it. Uh, Siddhartha was 29 years old. He was restless. He gave this name to his son as an indication, perhaps, of his psychological state, and he decided to leave the palace and venture into the outside world later on. Many argue Siddhartha's palace is metaphorical. It represents complacency and the self-delusion uh, that we might think that there is no such thing as suffering, but in fact there is. Just think, looking back at this part of his life, is it that Buddhist hope is taught through this? That is it perhaps about hedonism, that it won't in the end be satisfying? Uh, is this to inspire Buddhists to reflect on tanha later on, as this idea of craving, and that the craving will never be satisfied? Is this to point perhaps beyond that to the middle way, that the extreme of lots of luxury isn't helpful? And do you think his father was right to shield him from the sadness of the world? Buddhists certainly don't think so. Okay, tune in again when we'll look in number 5 at his leaving of the palace.